Thanks, Mike. It's great to have everybody here. Thanks for getting out here to San Mateo. Our general counsel, Anton's in the room. It's the first time I've been back here in 3 years. Used to work here for 3 years. Rode a scooter on 3rd Avenue. It was quite a life. Live in San Francisco now, as Mike alluded. I have kids on the way, so I'm kind of grounded travel-wise. So we're building a protocol infrastructure. So this is zero-fee cryptocurrency. So closest comparisons like Dash and Bitcoin Cash. We're not a Bitcoin competitor. We think the use case for Bitcoin is not payments. That might be contrarian in this room, but we think that there's a real opportunity to go after Visa and these debit and credit card networks with the original vision that Satoshi sort of laid out, which is censorship-resistant programmable payments. And that's what we're working on. So the big problem here is, think about if you're every time someone swipes your credit card or the debit card, it costs the merchant 2.5% to 3.5% per transaction. Every time you buy something, you take an Uber ride, it costs Uber 2.5% to 3.5%. And that money gets paid to not just the processors, the Visas and the MasterCards, but it gets paid to the acquiring bank and to the merchant bank. So the opportunity here is at 2.5% to 3.5%. We think that this is the big gorilla in the cryptocurrency space in terms of use cases to really be able to deliver zero-fee payment infrastructure. So if you were to sort of boil down our vision, it's to say Storecoin is zero-fee programmable payments infrastructure for the globe, almost like AWS, general compute. We think this is a $21 trillion market. If you look at the size of the transaction volume across credit and debit card networks, a good way to kind of think about Storecoin, if Ripple's going after SWIFT transfers, we're going after those debit and credit card network transfers. We think that, again, going back to the use case for Bitcoin being this P2P censorship-resistant payment protocol, Bitcoin was never designed to have zero fees. So we think a peer-to-peer, censorship-resistant, very decentralized, very high throughput, programmable cryptocurrency is as Mike alluded to, it's a real top 5 use case for this technology. So we do this by using a small amount of inflation to pay for transactions. So instead of the miners taking a fee from the users, the customers, the developers, a small amount of inflation is used to pay the miners and a number of other decentralized workers and a number of other, let's call it, funds to incentivize the distribution of the currency. Our economic model is very decentralized, so it's instead of one block at a time where there's one winner, it's every participant in consensus is rewarded. We think this incentivizes for more participation in the network. And there's sort of been a fascination with smart contracts and kind of what's called Web3. We believe in that world. I think that world's going to happen. We think it's probably a little premature. Infrastructure is the most critical problem in this space, a real programmable infrastructure. So we call our focus not Web3, not the smart contract where you have kind of tokens sitting on top of tokens, is just taking a token and making it as sound as possible, as high amounts of store value as possible, and as programmable as possible. Not in the smart contract layer, but just in the web application layer. So if you're a mobile or web application developer, you can build on top of Storecoin and bring zero-fee payments into your application. And you don't have to use Visa. You don't have to use banking-based fiat systems. And our focus there is about getting what we call minimum viable protocol, minimum viable trust, high degrees of store value, sound currency, and then we'll have the potential to get into the smart contract layer, but our real vision, as you'll see, is to get into the cash register. So we talk about, there's this meme in the space that it says that you can't have sort of decentralization scalability. We think that's baloney. We think you can. And it comes down to your technical designs. And not just your technical designs, but your economic incentive systems. And so for us is, we sort of say technology, economics, and governance deliver decentralization. They all have to work together as this holistic, we'll call it consensus protocol that we call dynamic proof of stake. And so from a technology perspective, our consensus algorithm is called leaderless. Every participant is rewarded. And from an economics perspective, it's about, a slice of the block reward is used. So if you're Square or Stripe, you have no economic incentive to carry Bitcoin or Ether or other underlying currencies because you don't get paid. when a transaction happens. No one talks about this. They're in the business of making money for processing and securing transactions. Our design enables this economic optionality that lets us cut in these merchant card networks, or not the card networks, the processors. Think about the Apple Store, right, or the Google Wallet. Every time they process a Storecoin transaction, we'll have the ability to cut them into the block reward. So instead of getting paid by the transaction fee that the user pays, or the merchant pays, or the developer pays, they get paid by the actual block reward. So it's I hate to use buzzwords, but it's a fairly revolutionary economic incentive model for this space. And then governance, we're big believers in what we call kind of enterprise-grade governance. You can sort of think of governance as just a professional change log. So if you're the CIO at Pepsi and you want to put $10 million of transaction volume a day through a cryptocurrency, you need to understand how it changes. And you need to be able to more or less assign a risk price to the potential of change. And you look at governance in cryptocurrencies, it's really three things. It's features, and smart contracts is just a feature. It's leadership, nonprofit leadership, core dev team, and it's monetary policy, which we sort of make the argument is the most important thing. So we have this sort of checks and balances based system that takes a little bit of inspiration from the Constitution, but it's very binary, logical. You can study it and understand how change happens. So our approach to scalability is quite radical, actually. So most protocols kind of do one thing, one block at a time. The miner, the validator node does all the work, hosts the data. We separate that, and instead of doing one block at a time, I'm running low on time, so I'm going to move a little faster. We do multiple blocks at a time. So as a current block is being finalized, we actually take what used to be sort of chain forks, or Ethereum kind of rolls these up as uncles. We take those and we actually start writing the next set of transactions to those empty blocks. So as a current block is being finalized, we start publishing the next block. So we're doing what's called parallel pipeline processing. We think we're on an engineering path to be able to do hundreds and thousands of transactions per second with potentially hundreds and thousands of computers with this approach. And so we're building this right now. We don't have a test net out. It's still early. We're very execution milestone based as a team. But we're excited about what we're doing, and I think you'll hear more about this approach to consensus as Q4 rolls. So a little bit about governance. You have what we call a separation of powers. You have a executive branch, which is more or less the core dev team, the nonprofit. They're almost like public servants. You have what's called a judicial branch, which looks a little like the board of directors. Their responsibility is to kind of hire and fire the executive branch. Because if there is change voted on in the executive branch, the core dev team decides not to actually ship that software, that's a fireable offense, right? And the judicial branch's primary role is actually to not just fire and hire the executive team, but to also make suggestions for monetary policy. So our system is fused with different economic incentives to create decentralization and security. You can make the case that any change to monetary policy has the greatest impact on the protocol and the overall ecosystem. So instead of a Fed-like system where one branch can say, this is what we're doing, and that's the rule, their job is to study monetary policy and make suggestions to the decentralized branch. So these are the actual workers, the folks who run nodes to process, secure, scale, govern the protocol. And so the judicial branch can make suggestions with really elegant cases on what should change, and the D branch votes on them. If they vote on them, then the nonprofit can actually overrule, say, no, we're not going to do this. But then the D branch can take another vote with higher thresholds and overrule the nonprofit. And at that point, it's the responsibility of the nonprofit to ship that, and the operators of the software will recognize that. This creates a path for a hard fork. It enables participation, potentially, thousands and thousands of major companies and developers and you name it, to have a seat at the table. So it's a breakthrough. We talk about having an 8-year roadmap and a 1,000-year vision. It's really about thinking long term. Our job is to build internet infrastructure for the globe that lasts really forever. So 1% of the block reward will get paid out to the Storecoin, the foundation, to endow it forever. We take 20% of treasury and we actually spread it out over 1,000 years. So in 2,400 project leaders will have access to Genesis block treasury to do deals with banks, deals with countries to get distribution. But we look at it, we start with just getting consensus off the ground, and then high degrees of store value, so we sound money. And then we start introducing some smart contracting infrastructure because that gives us the ability to get into the cash register. The reason why crypto is not in cash register today is not just because the banks aren't getting paid, but you have to solve chargebacks and you have to solve payment fraud. And we have designed for that. Very focused on execution, engineering driven. You can see this if you want on storeco.in/engineering. Our team, so I've been building software for the last 16 years. I'm kind of I suppose now I could call myself a serial entrepreneur. I've always said I didn't want to do that, but I guess that's what I am. I like to invent systems, but I've really been trying to solve payments since I was 19. We tried to do it with a previous company. We tried to bring Bitcoin in and use Bitcoin as a sort of programmable payments layer where you could sort of send money to 1,000 different networks with a single API call. Couldn't do it. Sort of had to kind of, abandon the space for a while because it just lost a little hope. But it was right around the same time Vitalik was recognized the limitations of Bitcoin as well and spun up smart contracts. So we sort of came out of the same era. But I've always been focused on using the actual protocol token as a payments token inside the application layer. So we call that Web C, by the way, not Web 3. We got a great team. Ari Paul, Block Tower is one of our earlier investors, very strategic. He's going to write a post on our governance system here and post it in a couple of weeks, which is super cool. Stephen McKeon, we got Anton. We got a growing list of team. Matt Acco from DC VC just joined. We're sort of collecting really great people to be part of this intellectual experiment. And we're getting, I'd say it's kind of a big part of my job now is that. So a summary, fast ledger, 5,000 transactions per second with potentially thousands of nodes participating, zero fee payments, paid with yearly inflation, capped at 2%, but pegged to staking. So we want 51% of the circulating supply to be staked. We want 49% to be available for payments, governance checks and balances, economic optionality to solve for chargebacks and payment fraud, same thing to actually pay distributors, banks for distribution for the store token. We'll support the development of these crypto-powered apps, call them C-apps, call it Web C, not Web 3. We think zero fee programmable payments is an infrastructure layer for the internet that just doesn't exist yet. We have an ecosystem fund that will make investments to help the project. We're already starting to do this. And we have a growing community who believe in Storecoins. We have people, 56 countries around the world wearing Storecoin t-shirts like Anton has, taking photos. It's really starting to become a movement. And all money is trust. And so we're focused on the long run. And if we get this right, we can, that $21 trillion payments in the credit debit card space, we could actually take a slice of that with zero fees. But we could also take a slice of the $100 trillion wealth market. Because if you own Storecoins and you stake them to participate in consensus, you earn tokens. So you stake your wealth. So we think this has the ability to become global infrastructure for payments, for wealth, and for innovation. Yeah.
Okay, questions for Chris?
How does it work? Do I still use my debit card, or do I have to buy Storecoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're going to have to. We haven't actually hit that challenge yet, but we think of it like if you're Square or Stripe, you would whatever layer that the consumer uses to interface with your system, Storecoin becomes part of that layer. So we don't really intend to issue credit cards to you. It would be the design could evolve to that of decentralized workers. Our miners are the ones who potentially issue the card. That's a great question, but we're not initially focused on the cash register layer because we have to build more infrastructure. We're focused on the low-hanging fruit of apps, mobile and web app payments. So there's not a credit card needed for the early use case.
So I'm in an app store, and I still use my credit card in the app store.
Yeah. So you'd have an option to be able to pay with your store tokens.
Okay, and then I would go buy those on an exchange or from your site? Or?
Yeah, so you'd buy them from whatever OTC desk or liquidity provider existed. Maybe you've earned them because you're actually processing consensus. Maybe you bought it in token sales. The question is, why would, this is the fundamental answer in the space. If the currency is going up in value, why would you spend it, right? And if it's going down in value, why would a merchant accept it? Right? Those are the two sort of issues in the space. So the answer is when you cut out that transaction fee, what you do is you create a design space for the merchant to actually reduce the price of its product if you pay using your tokens. And so if the merchant reduces its price, you're incentivized to actually pay with your tokens because you get a better price on the product than you would if you're paying in traditional fiat. And because we can always maybe a Storecoin is worth $1 one day, maybe it's 50 cents the next day, but you as the buyer, it's always pegged to $1. So it just could be worth, it could take more Storecoins to buy something. And so we're working on these tools to make that possible for developers to create these payment experiences that make that obvious.
Something I didn't see in your slides was distribution.
Yeah.
What's the distribution plan?
We're talking about on what context?
Is it going to be like an ICO?
Oh, yeah. We don't talk a lot about token sales. We're pretty quiet. We've raised a tiny amount of treasury on purpose just to be very milestone driven. Disclaimer: Michael's an investor in the project, and we get some great investors. We're going to do a third token sale likely coming up. We have probably like 4,000 to 5,000 people lined up to get into that sale right now. It's probably going to be just a $5 million sale, right around $50, $60 million market capitalization. And then we intend to do 2 or 3 more milestone-based sales before we actually launch the protocol, and they'll all be quite small. So from a comparison, where we're at valuation-wise is similar to where Ethereum was at when they did their ICO. And it's about 20x less than Dfinity, 50x less than Hashgraph. We're just being conservative and trying to get distribution for as many people as we can.
Is it disclosed to accredited investors?
No. I mean, in U.S., unfortunately,
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. Unfortunately, we have to do that. But we're pretty aggressive on Reg S compliance, country by country. So we want in this next sale, our goal is to actually go to 21 countries where we have wallet distribution with 1,000 plus wallets. And so we're going to let people participate with as little as $250. And we've sort of countercultured the whole space. Everybody wants $5,000 to $10,000 buy-ins, and we're like that. We want people who are going to run our software, and people are going to believe in this as a mission. So we fought tooth and nail to create that environment, and then we'll likely move into an auction-based sale after. So instead of us pricing Storecoin, we'll let the market kind of determine.
So I'm curious. First of all, I think hiding the costs in inflation is a very elegant approach,
Yeah.
and I really like that. I'm curious, how do you think about positioning against if there is a viable, scalable stable coin at some point in the future that also has a no or low fee function?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about positioning there? Because obviously there will be some element of friction just from exchanges between Storecoin and fiat currencies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in stable coins. I don't think they have utility. I think they're just Silicon Valley kind of going crazy. But we're working in our economic designs on ways to stabilize the currency. So one design we're looking at right now is taking maybe 5% of the treasury and having that be algorithmically traded over OTC, right, in spikes and decreases to move in and out of USD or Bitcoin. And that would be run by our judicial branch. So there's a group called Block Science out in Oakland. They're going to join our team here shortly and help us really harden our economic models, and we'll release our economics paper. But we're looking at that carefully. We just don't have a formal design for it. So I guess the answer is I just don't think there's going to be a stable coin that matters in 5 years. Yeah. Outside of traders. Traders need it for obvious reasons, but yeah.
How do you get merchants excited about accepting your transactions if there is high volatility? I know you mentioned it a little bit in his
Yeah,
answer.
that's a fundamental question for the entire industry, right? And our gut says this, that as, say you're an investor, you're going to be able to look at Storecoin and say, we know how much the tokens, we know how much the supply is staked, right? We know what the network looks like. We know how many developers there are. We know how much transaction volume there is. So we can kind of we can actually understand valuation more fundamentally about these crypto networks. And it'll be more stable once you can really unpack what a protocol is. So we're really focused on those things. But with that said, if you're a developer, creating really elegant experiences for you to let the buyer know that they're saving money on a transaction if they use Store versus using other. And there's other elements of zero fee. It's fascinating when you really achieve that. Obviously, micropayments has kind of been a dream for internet developers forever. But what you enable is you as a developer to actually, instead of the banks getting the fee, enabling you as a developer to take a small cut of every transaction. So you can actually tax your network, if you want to use it that way. And then I'll say one thing just about kind of the other zero fee protocol that's well known in this space, EOS. It's not free. If you're a developer, you have to buy and stake tokens in order to power free transactions. So like, it would cost about $1.5 billion as of like a month ago. I don't think that number holds up right now, to power CryptoKitties as a developer. So it's SaaS. It's not free.
I have another question. How can you achieve such high throughput without sacrificing decentralization?
Yeah, so I kind of skipped that just to talk about the protocol a little bit, but we separate the data from consensus in a two-tier architecture. And what this enables is you as the validator client to be a lot lighter than just having like a full node. And multiple blocks being processed at once. So the analogy is this. You go back to the 1800s, the early use case for oil was kerosene, and the rest of the oil was basically waste. It was thrown into the lakes and the rivers. And as the automobile industry came along, Rockefeller and Standard Oil figured out how to refine that even further and turn that waste into gas, right? So what we're doing is taking sort of chain forks and orphan blocks, and instead of discarding them as kind of wasted compute, we're actually using them to start building the next block as the current block is being finalized. And so we create our own sort of version of gas within consensus. And then as we move into a master node model for scalability, we'll introduce what's called an encrypted agent. So you'll be able to, the encrypted agent will have private key access to the validator. It'll be able to reach consensus on behalf of the validator without having any data whatsoever. So consensus will be near instant across potentially hundreds and thousands of computers.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to share some more technical details as well. Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, remember to vote. Are you interested, yes or no?
Email me.